Hi, gorgeous lights. Welcome to the new day. Look, I was thinking today, and I've seen a lot of people lately, we're having a lot of planetary shifts and alignments going on, and the energy in the airways is completely all over the place. What it is actually doing is it's condensing. So the universe is kind of pushing on you to look at, like, you can say your soul contract with yourself and what you come to do, your emotional states, karmic learning. There's a whole lot of stuff going on at the moment. When things like this happen, the energy changes, uncertainty on the earth plane, we're always pushed into our emotional well-being and looking to our emotional well-being. Now, on the earth plane, we absolutely suck at, and I mean that, at looking after ourselves, at doing self-care, self-nurturing, all of those sorts of things that are incredibly crucial. And I was thinking about it, and I know that I've put this parable up before, but I don't think I've read it before. And it's absolutely, completely sums up the expectations, I think, of society for who we think we should turn up as well. So the parable is actually called The Perfect Untruth, and it goes like this. A man and a woman lived together in a small cottage in the middle of nowhere. Well, that's not strictly accurate. They lived in proximity to a small village, but they felt they were miles away from the rest of the world. Perfectly contented in their small world, they actually did work incredibly hard. The man worked very hard in the fields and the small woodlot close to them. He hummed as he worked all day, but he felt the pull on his body of endless hours of hard work for the food on their table and the life that they tried to lead. The woman tended the house, and she cooked endless hours over the fire stove and spent time bending, baking, tending and making clothes and food. She too felt the pull on her body as the workload that she had took its toll on her hands, which were red and chafed and worn and crooked. Her back ached constantly, and she hummed to herself as she worked to distract herself from her pain. They were very hard-working people. Every Saturday, relentlessly, they walked together to the village to buy extra things that they may require, candles and string and sewing thread and nails and dry goods, and the man carried a pack on his back and the woman a basket for what she required. She sighed inadvertently as she walked, and the man paused and looked at her. "Are you okay, my dear?" he inquired. She smiled at him and flapped a hand at him. "I'm perfectly fine," she said, and they walked on in silence. They reached the village and they moved through the Saturday stalls, a bit like a farmer's market of goodies for the purchases that they required. They greeted their neighbours with warmth. "How was your week?" "Good," the stallholders called. "How was yours?" And the woman replied, "Fine. It was perfectly fine." Her feet ached and her back ached. She cradled the basket closer and moved to the next stall. The fishmonger was there today, and she looked at her coins and decided to purchase a fish for their supper on the way home. She pointed at the two small fish on the table and said, "May I have those, please?" The fishmonger told her how much they were, and she fingered her coins. "It's fine, that will be perfect." Her mind racing, she thought of what she could have to sell in the neighbouring house next week for her to cover her sudden taste for fish. The fishmonger wrapped the fish and handed it to her. As she reached over, she found a dreadful pulling sensation in her back and she froze. Pain shot through her, rippling up her spine as she clutched the table. "Are you okay?" The fishmonger watched her carefully. "I'm fine, perfectly fine," she whispered, and tried slowly to straighten herself. He placed the fish carefully in her basket, all the time watching her face. "Are you sure? You've got extremely pale." The woman straightened as slowly as if 1,000 years old. "I'm fine," she whispered, "perfectly fine," as she turned away from the table to find her man. She searched the crowd as pain zinged up and down her spine, every step in agony. She saw him down by the millman, purchasing a sack of flour that she had asked for. She took 2 steps forward and breathed out a gasp. A woman in a black dress turned and looked at her carefully. "Are you okay?" She moved to help the other woman, but the woman flapped her hand at her. "I'm perfectly fine, thank you anyway." The other woman in the black dress looked very concerned. The pallor of the woman's face was ghost-like, and deep lines of pain were etched on her face. She shook her head. The woman was not okay, clearly not okay, but she repeated her words enough to step back and move out of her way. The man at the moment looked up to see his wife standing in the middle of the market, her face stark white with pain, and he excused himself from the miller quickly, taking the flour with him. He reached for her and she pulled back slightly. "Whatever is wrong?" he whispered to her urgently. She smiled at him, a small smile, and assured him, I'm fine, perfectly fine. The man frowned. You are not perfectly fine at all. And he looked around to see others watching the two of them and asked quietly, shall I take your arm? She shook her head and repeated, I'm fine, I'm perfectly fine. She stepped a tiny step away from him and inched towards home, moving at a snail pace. He matched her pace, and together they slowly and painfully moved out of the village and towards home. It felt like hours had passed before they reached a small cottage. Her breath was shallow and laboured, and the sweat was pouring from her brow. No longer was she white, she was grey-looking and haggard. The man was beside himself with worry, for she had not said a single word all the way home. She literally crawled up the steps and into the house. He moved what he could out of her way and took the basket and her shawl from her. She didn't utter a squeak as she collapsed on the bed. He waited impatiently for her to open her eyes and stood helplessly when she did not. In the end, he asked, shall I call the doctor? What shall I do? She weakly replied without opening her eyes, I am fine, perfectly fine. In his frustration, he stalked outside and kicked the chopping block. For the last couple of months, he had seen her becoming more and more tired, more and more pained looking, but he had not stopped to ask how she was doing. He was preoccupied with his own body and the tasks he had during the course of the day. She worked as hard as what he did, and they were both grateful for each other, but he decided he had enough of the perfect untruth that she was telling him, what she called perfectly fine. He decided for himself and walked back to the village. He called to the doctor and asked him to come and visit. Whatever is the matter, the doctor asked the man, and the man replied, in truth, I do not know, but she's in terrible pain, and it gives me the perfect untruth every time, that she is perfectly fine. I see, said the doctor. I'll come back with you now, and we'll get to the bottom of this. They walked in silence back through the village and into the small cottage. The man opened the door to see his wife, white as a sheet, unpacking the contents of the small basket she had got at the market. He raced to her. What are you doing? She looked at him through darkened, pain-filled eyes. Unpacking the goods. He stared at her in dismay, and she looked at him again. I'm perfectly fine, she said miserably. The doctor moved to her side and looked into her eyes. No, you are not, he said kindly, and her husband moved to her side and touched her arm gently as the woman cried out. The moral of the story: this is a story about pain and a painful experience, but one of the biggest untruths that we tell ourselves is that we're actually okay, physically okay, mentally okay, emotionally okay. We may have been really hurt by someone, let down by someone. We may be frustrated with life and with our jobs, annoyed with our kids, lonely and misunderstood, in constant pain from our body or pressure from our mind. One of the worst untruths we can possibly say is that we're fine. Yet, as we deal with family, our loved ones and friends, we tell this untruth over and over again. We are all in this together, and we gain nothing from doing this. Absolutely nothing. Just a continuation of feeling alone within ourselves, within our mind, within our pain. We're all suffering the same issues, the same problems, the same thought patterns in so many ways, just by being human beings. The earth plane journey is incredible, but it's not easy. There's many, many things to navigate, and many, many things that require honesty and understanding and care and compassion and empathy with each other. We keep being reminded that we need to say this perfect untruth, that you're perfectly fine or you're fine. Now, I watch people, I look at their colours and I look at they're not okay, and they will come out and tell you that they're absolutely fine. When was it okay for us to lie to other people as well as lying to ourselves? It doesn't make you brave, and it certainly doesn't make you feel understood by other people. I watch people say, it's too much of a bother to tell somebody else where I'm at. When did you get told you were too much of a bother? The only thing that's going to progress us forward is compassion and empathy and understanding. And the one thing that we've got to stop doing is feeling like we have to apologise that we're not okay, or not feeling okay, or we're in pain, or something's troubling us, in our societal programming. It's one of the most awful things that I think I see, and we really need to get rid of this untruth. Most of the time, we are limping through, literally, life trying to do the very best that we can, trying to look at the positive side, trying and trying and trying. We need to start cutting each other slack, and we need to stop saying this dreadful untruth at times that we are fine when we are not. I really would like you guys to think about this and this energy of shifting change that we're in, that is building resentment, frustration, and anger, just spurting out in unexpected ways. We have got to start to be more honest, and then we can rally and unify with each other and love and support and care. And by crikey, this planet needs it. So please have a think about the perfect untruth parable. Think about how many times do you actually say, when someone takes the time to ask you, are you okay? Do you answer honestly, or do you tell the perfect untruth? Just have a think about it.